What's going on, guys? It is Fox98 here. Welcome back to a brand new video and another episode of the F1 debate for you guys today here on the channel. Today, we're going to be discussing the F1 2024 Hungarian Grand Prix, in which we saw drama mostly from the team radio rather than the track action, but we still got plenty of track action drama as well to discuss. If you guys are new around here and you do enjoy the content you do see, be sure to drop it a like and also subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well. It goes a long, long way for me and I'd very, very much appreciate it. So, let's get down to business then. We're going to cover the Grand Prix itself, cover the key topics, and obviously the comment section down below, let me know what you think of the race itself. If you've got anything that you want to put into his, any pointers or anything like that, they're open for interpretation, because there's a lot of things to discuss. So first things first, what did I actually think of the race? I thought it was genuinely a very good Grand Prix. There was plenty of action, plenty of team radio messages, and I think we could definitely make a soap that would challenge Coronation Street and EastEnders with what we saw out there today. But let's go through the Grand Prix itself then. Obviously, it was a very chaotic start between Piastri, Norris and Verstappen, the three of them going wide in towards turn 1, which led to Verstappen going off the track and gaining second place. Lando Norris having a bad start, dropping to third. And then we obviously saw as well Oscar Piastri taking the lead by going down the inside of Lando Norris and going into the race lead. The first thing to note here is that once again, this is the second time now this season that Lando Norris has started from pole and basically just had a bad start. You could see straight away that his initial launch was not good enough compared to Oscar Piastri. This allowed Norris, this forced Norris to have to cover Oscar Piastri going in towards turn 1 and going so tight to that line. This gave Verstappen the optimal line to swoop around the outside into turn 1. Where things differentiated is obviously Norris is trying to watch his inside line, but he's also trying to watch his outside line as well. 3 into 1 doesn't normally tend to go, especially when Piastri on that inside line is probably not going to be able to see Verstappen all the way on the outside line, so his job is just to force Lando Norris a little bit wide, which is what he did. But he's also then put himself into a position where Norris has to go wide because Oscar's forcing him wide, and then it's a domino effect. Max knew there wasn't going to be any room there. So it obviously led with Oscar in the lead, Verstappen second, and Piastri in third. Hamilton also had a very good start. He managed to overtake Charles Leclerc and also Carlos Sainz. Was it Sainz that out-qualified him? It was, yeah. It was Sainz that out-qualified Hamilton, so he got in front of the Ferrari, which I think was crucial. Sainz didn't have a good start himself. He dropped behind Hamilton, Leclerc, and also Fernando Alonso and had to overtake him in order to get the place back. So, you know, fair enough. He got that move done, Sainz re-overtaking Alonso. But he was never really a factor in today's Grand Prix, was Carlos Sainz. While I felt like he had the upper hand all weekend over Charles Leclerc, didn't quite have it in that opening phase of the race, and to be honest, for quite a lot of the race, actually. But obviously, we then eventually saw Lando get back past Verstappen because Red Bull basically said, you need to let him pass because it went under investigation. And normally in those circumstances, it would have just gone down to a penalty. And obviously, as we know, these days now, the penalties are so much more severe. There is just no point in doing it. So you're just in a position where you're basically guaranteeing a 10-second penalty when you just don't need to be giving away those type of penalties. So of course that was the key feature in why Red Bull said to Verstappen, look, just let him through, we just discuss it afterwards. They've finally done something, the FIA, which I'm actually happy with, and they finally stopped teams and drivers from basically going, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll cut the corners, we'll gain the lasting advantage, and we'll just take 5 seconds because that'll do. The fact that it's 10 seconds now, I think it's made a massive impact for us as fans watching, and also for the teams in terms of, look, it's not worth it. Let's just take the penalty. Let's just take the pain of giving that place back, and we'll go for it again. Ultimately, the Red Bull was not in a position in race pace to compete with McLaren on that medium compound tyre. They weren't quicker. They dropped back Verstappen to about 3 and a bit seconds over the McLaren of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Or for Lando Norris, it was 3 seconds. For Oscar Piastri, it dropped to like 8.5 seconds, I think it was, when the first pit stops came around, which was massive. If you think about it in comparison to where we started the season, now where we are in the season, to see the Red Bull in the end of the first stint, nearly 10 seconds back from the race lead is a massive turnaround. And obviously, this weekend, we saw Red Bull brought a very significant upgrade to the Hungarian Grand Prix, albeit it was only on Max Verstappen's car, we need to remember that, but it was more so an upgrade that they were trying to say, that was for cooling purpose, to help with the cooling, obviously a reshape of the engine cover, the side pod, but they said it was more so to help them on a high downforce circuit, but then that the sort of shoulder barged gullies that we've seen on their car throughout the course of the season would come back for then the low downforce tracks like your Spas, your Monzas, and Baku. But it was interesting to see that this massive upgrade, it didn't really work, kind of. McLaren sort of was still ahead, quite comfortably ahead in the race trim. Now, I'll give it in its sort of grantedness. Verstappen on the hard compound tyres was definitely quicker than the McLarens. We saw when Hamilton pitted, Verstappen was able to get through and gain quite a lot. But at the same time, McLaren, I suppose, can put themselves in a position where they can manage quite a lot in comparison. I mean, you know, when you've got a 10-second lead, you can afford to back off just a little bit and just, like Red Bull have done before, just turn the car and the engine modes down. Because obviously, again, with it being such a hot race as well, you're going to want to control your temps. So if McLaren are able to turn their engine modes down and, you know, maintain temperature, you know, that's all great for them. Obviously, in the first stint, we saw Lewis Hamilton making the undercut on Red Bull and basically starting the whole Max Verstappen GP drama part 752, apart from the fact this went on quite a lot. Like, Max was really pissed all race long, and to an extent, I kind of saw it coming. With the gap between Verstappen and Norris at around about 3.5 seconds, to see Hamilton about 1.1, 1.2 behind, you just knew that Mercedes were just going to go, well, track position's king around here, so we're just going to do the undercut. Thanks, guys. And they did. Obviously, Red Bull extended their stint, went 5 laps longer, and there's a tale of two halves here. Verstappen was obviously shouting at his engineer because they put him on what he quoted as a shit strategy. But also, you need to remember that Verstappen was then... It's hard, because if you pit too early, then yes, you'll have the undercut, but you'll have the tyre advantage. Let's not get it twisted here. Verstappen has 5 laps of a tyre advantage versus, with all due respect, a slower car. The Red Bull was quicker than the Mercedes this weekend in the race. That's just a fact, Doug. Again, the Red Bull wasn't brilliant in the opening phases of the race, but it was a lot quicker in the other portions of the Grand Prix. So there's that to counter into it. And again, you've got a tyre advantage now of 5 laps, and in the final stint, that tyre advantage was 9 laps. So he had so much more tyre life advantage to work on. And it's the same thing as Lando Norris in Barcelona. Obviously, Norris stayed out long in Barcelona, pitted, lost a lot of time, but gained it all back again. Obviously, Norris didn't overtake in that scenario. But it's the same sort of format here. If you can't cover yourself from the undercut, go long, wait for either a safety car or build a tyre offset so significant that you can make the move. And of course, Max got in a position where he did make the move. He overtook Lewis Hamilton, but he went wide into turn 2 and went offline and off the track and couldn't get past Hamilton again. Then when we go to the final stint, Verstappen had a chance again to overtake Hamilton, but he sent it very deep up the inside on Lewis Hamilton and he caused a crash. That's his own fault. That's no one else's fault. That's Max's fault for crashing into Lewis. So it is what it is at the end of the day. And we'll look at that incident as well later on after we've covered everything else. But the rest of the field, to be honest, there wasn't really much care. No disrespect, but there wasn't really much care for the rest of the field and what they were doing because all the chaos was going on up front. I mean, obviously we had Piastri who did a fantastic job all race long. And I'll talk about the McLaren drama in a minute. But he had a great race all the way through. Lando had a very good race, apart from the start, again, which in this situation cost him dear. And I'll give credit as well to the Ferraris, especially Charles Leclerc. They were a lot quicker than I guess I thought they would be. I thought they would be, I mean, they were quick obviously in qualifying because Sainz out-qualified Hamilton, but they were putting themselves in a position where they were there in the Grand Prix, if that makes sense. Like, obviously Leclerc was able to capitalise from Verstappen's mess up of an overtake on Lewis Hamilton and take the place. Sainz obviously tried to get back through as well, but I thought it was a very good performance from Ferrari. Obviously, it won't be something that they'll be satisfied with. I mean, finishing 4th and 6th and albeit a good 20-odd seconds off the race lead. And of course, again, the thing that we need to note as well is while they finished 20 seconds off the race lead, and for example, Hamilton finished, 4 14, something in my mouth, 14, 15 seconds off the race lead, something like that. Let's not take it into perspective that the fact is that Lando Norris was a good 6 seconds clear of Piastri before the team radio drama came into play. So they were obviously, you've got to count in for Mercedes, they finished 20 seconds off the lead in the end. And then for Ferrari, they finished a good 30 plus seconds off the lead in the end. Ultimately, this was a McLaren circuit. Let's not get that wrong. It's a circuit that suited them super, super well. To be honest, all tracks suit McLaren. They have the best car on the grid now. There's no denying. I personally will now, I'm happily to say that Red Bull don't have the fastest car anymore. It's McLaren that's got the quickest car. I think Red Bull have got the second quickest car. I think Mercedes have the third fastest car. I just think this weekend in particular for Mercedes, this is a weekend where everything didn't suit the W15. But ultimately, they still got a good package on them. That's a bit sus as well. So, in terms of the rest of the grid, it was more so just what was going on in the pit stops. It was a tyre deg race. We obviously saw a two-stop strategy all round, different tyre strategies. Obviously, Aston started on the softs. That didn't really work out too well. They just lost loads of time. And pretty much it was just, do you want to undercut somebody, or do you want to stay out, do a tyre offset, and then come back past them later in the Grand Prix? That's kind of what the race was for everyone else behind. But then we get to the stuff at the front. We get to the drama. We get to the Coronation Street, the EastEnders creme de la creme of McLaren Formula One racing team. The team orders of Lando Norris being forced to let Oscar Piastri back through to win his first ever Grand Prix in Formula One. Was it the right call? Was it the wrong call? Let's talk about it, shall we? For me, it was the right call. I think, ultimately, in my personal opinion, Lando Norris was favoured by the team all race long. Obviously, when it comes to a race, you always put preference to the number one driver on track at the time. Oscar Piastri was number one on the track, but they pitted Lando Norris first. Now, that's obviously because Red Bull were pitting Max Verstappen, so McLaren pitted with Lando Norris. That first time is absolutely fine with me. I've got no problem with that at all. You know, to cover off Verstappen is fine. You're eligible to leave Piastri out for a lap longer. I've got no issues with that. Obviously, Piastri had a bit of a messy second stint. He was about 4 and a bit seconds clear. Then it dropped to around about a second after he tried to get through some back markers and ran wide on one of the corners and put some dirt on his tyres and lost a good 2 and a bit seconds. So, obviously, Lando closed the gap. But I think Oscar then just started to bring it back out a little bit and get himself under control. Where I have massive disagreements with McLaren in particular is the call to bring in Norris first for the second stint. The purpose of it was to cover Lewis Hamilton. The problem for McLaren, and this is why I still have issues with them as a team, yes, finally they converted a 1-2 front row lockout into a 1-2 race victory. Fantastic. But they made it the hardest and most complicated, simple 1-2 I've ever seen. In the most dominant car on the grid, a 1-2 finish around one of the trickiest tracks to overtake on, and somehow it was so difficult. The point was, they wanted to bring Norris in to cover Lewis Hamilton. The point is, not only have you got the fastest car, but at the stage when Hamilton pitted, he pitted, and he was about 10 seconds behind McLaren. So ultimately, if Hamilton's going to be lapping, let's call it a second and a bit faster per lap, you've got 10 seconds or 10 laps basically of leeway. And if you're then going onto your medium compound tyres at a tyre offset of 10 seconds, when ultimately in the final stint you pulled 20 seconds on him, what was the point? Why did you need to bring in Lando Norris at that time? You stayed out a couple of laps anyway. Lando was never ever going to be under pressure from Hamilton. And ultimately, let's just say, for example, Hamilton overtook Lando Norris. Would Lando Norris be able to get past Lewis Hamilton? All right, let's look at it. Verstappen couldn't get past Hamilton. But the difference is that the McLaren is a much, much quicker car and could easily have stayed with Hamilton in that middle sector and they would have got past. Would Hamilton have fought it? He probably would have tried a little bit, but he would have understood that the McLarens were not his race. This is my problem. McLaren were once again doing a strategy where they're in a 1-2 position and they're too busy looking at other cars behind them. Don't worry about them. You're miles clear. You don't need to pit Lando when Hamilton's catching. I think in the end, Hamilton got to about 3 seconds, I think it was, between him and Norris when they came out of the pits. That is now I'm talking. So there was plenty of time. Even if you kept Lando Norris out for one lap extra, all right, you would have been a bit touch and go if you didn't have a great pit stop, but just come in a lap or so earlier. Because I understand that Verstappen is also a threat at this point, but Verstappen needed to pass Charles Leclerc, he needed to pass Lewis Hamilton, and then he would have had to try and get back past those two McLarens, who ultimately were the quickest cars in there. So the second time to bring Norris in was pointless. And then we get to the drama of Lando Norris not wanting to give the place back to Oscar Piastri. My answer to that is, listen, I understand that Lando Norris is in a, quote, championship contention more so than Oscar Piastri. The problem that you've got is that Lando Norris, if he's going to win a world championship, he's got to become a complete driver. And Lando Norris is not a complete driver. He's nowhere near that. You know, he can get pole positions, congratulations, but he can't get race victories. In Barcelona, he had a rubbish start, dropped to third. In Hungary, he started on pole, he had a rubbish start, dropped to third, and Piastri controlled the Grand Prix. If you're going to be in a position, especially to challenge Max Verstappen, look at the 2021 season. Look at the start of 2022 as well, with Verstappen versus Charles Leclerc. Even look at Austria 2024. If you're going to put a challenge to Max Verstappen, you have to be an outright maniac on that track. In a good way, obviously. Lando Norris just isn't that. You know, he's just making so many mistakes. Let me get this straight, though. In that final stint, yeah, he pulled away from Piastri, and Piastri didn't have a good final stint. But when you've got so much chaos and uncertainty on the radio, especially for Piastri's sake, I can see why he dropped back, because, you know, it's sort of like, well, I'm meant to get this, and then you just lose that focus, lose that concentration, and initially lose a bit of trust in the team. Whereas for Lando, it's more like, I have more of a point to prove here. It doesn't bother me. Haha, I'm just going to carry on my race. You know, you guys can just have your own problems. But the problem is, Lando, if you had a good start and you were leading the race and you were controlling the race, then nobody would have any issues at all. Also, for me as well, if Lando Norris let Oscar Piastri back through much earlier in that stint, allowed the two drivers to pull away at a consistent gap, and say, for example, after Verstappen had crashed with Hamilton, then ultimately, I mean, at that point, they were already like 13 seconds back anyway. All Lando Norris needs to do is, if he used his head correctly, he understood that he's got more pace than Oscar, and you can see that he's pulling away. So all Lando needs to do is go, well, I know what I'll do then. I'll let Oscar back through. Fair enough, fine. I got more pace than Oscar, I'll just pass him. You know, but ultimately he put himself in a position where he couldn't do that because he left it all the way to the end to try and prove a point. If Lando let Oscar back through and said, right, we swapped positions, we're all good, but I'm now going to come at you on merit, no one's going to complain about it. I wouldn't complain about it, you know, and nobody would. You would say, well, Lando did what he was told to do. He was given the preferential pit stops to obviously help him in terms of covering off somebody he doesn't need to cover off because they're too far ahead. And then as soon as you get back past Oscar, as soon as Oscar gets back past you, then the two of you work as a team, pull out a bit of a gap, and if you're quicker than him, then just say, can I pass him? Because earlier in the race, if you remember, when Lando cut the gap to 1.3 seconds to Oscar, Will Joseph said to Lando, you are free to race the papaya car. McLaren wouldn't have stopped from Lando if he had pure pace to fight Oscar Piastri. They would have just been told, just keep it clean between the two of you and you're free to race. Look at Russell and Hamilton back at the British Grand Prix. They were in a 1-2 position. The track conditions were changing, but they fought and they made it cleanly. Same thing in Austria. Russell and Hamilton had a battle. They fought it out. It was clean. Job done. That's how it works. And I feel like they just got that wrong today. Overall, though, I just want to say a massive congratulations to Oscar Piastri. It was a fantastic race from him. Brilliant race win. Thoroughly deserved it. He's been on form since he joined Formula One at the start of last year. And it was a well-deserved win. A long time coming for him. And he thoroughly deserved it. He did nothing wrong all weekend long, apart from the going off the track. And also the bit with the gravel trap at the end of the second stint. But he's a rapidly quick driver. Super calm and collected. I do feel sorry for him though, because as you could kind of see, you could tell that his race celebration was very muted. And I think it was more so because it didn't pan out the way it should have. And I think that's, again, bad team management from McLaren. But ultimately, it's points gained, and that Constructors' Championship battle now is dropping consistently. Also, shout out to Sergio Perez and to George Russell, both of them qualifying down in 16th and 17th, respectively, fighting their way back up to P7 and P8. A very solid drive from Sergio Perez. Red Bull actually did his strategy pretty well because obviously Perez got overtaken by Russell in the first part of the race. But on the hard tyres, Red Bull brought Perez in, did the undercut, then managed the pace between him and Russell beautifully. That was a very good and needed drive from Perez, especially to then just finish 2 places back behind from Verstappen. Overall, it's a solid drive from him and a solid drive from Russell. Same thing too with Tsunoda. Obviously, the big crash in qualifying definitely would have hurt him a little bit. But to come back and to have a great recovery to get P9 in the end, ahead of, I think it was Stroll. I think they got P10. I'll just check that on my phone. I know one of them got P10 in the end, but I can't remember if it was Stroll or if it was Alonso. No, it was Stroll that got P10 ahead of Alonso and then Ricciardo. So fair play to them on that one. Looking at the rest of the classification here, whilst I've got my phone out, Haas were a little bit surprising. I thought they would have a bit more pace in this race, but they didn't. So it is what it is at the end of the day with them. Williams, a bit of a messy race for them. I know Albon was quite whiny on the radio, stating, I don't know why would you tell me to do this when I've just been pushing and the tyres were dead or whatever. And then Sauber, well, I mean, Sauber are useless anyway. They're just way far down the order. And Alpine had an absolute shocker. They've been a team that's been on a bit of an upwards trajectory, but have just slopped right back down to bottom again. They started on the back row of the grid. Alpine put Gasly to start in the pits, and then they just boxed and retired him. I don't know why, but they did. Probably because they couldn't be bothered to just race at the back. And Ocon finishing down in 18th place doesn't really help the cause there. And then obviously we get to Verstappen having a massive ding-dong whine with Red Bull and obviously their strategy. Now, overall, the massive amount of complaining on the radio, don't get me wrong, I just found it quite funny. More so because I don't like Verstappen, so to see him just miserable all the time was quite satisfying, although that's a bit sad to say in that circumstance. But I'm not a fan of Verstappen, so to see him just getting a bit irate, at that point I found it quite funny. But ultimately, you can kind of see why. I mean, he's in a position now where the Red Bull is not the quickest car anymore. Obviously, Verstappen wants the competition. But as he was trying to say, I mean, Verstappen's a man that just vents his frustration more than anybody else. He's like Yuki Tsunoda. And again, I don't like Tsunoda either, but Tsunoda just shouts and swears at everything. Maybe Tsunoda should get the Red Bull seat so they can both shout at their engineers and Giampiero Lambiase can have some, the other race engineer to just sort of comfort each other when their drivers go at them. But he was, I guess, right in some circumstances. I mean, ultimately, as well as Verstappen was saying after qualifying, Red Bull brought a massive upgrade package here to Hungary, a whole new engine cover, adjustment to the side pod and the water slide going down into the rear rear suspension of the car, and ultimately also some changes to the front wing and the front nose as well. And ultimately, all these changes meant that they still aren't quicker than McLaren, and that's a worry for them. And Verstappen will know that they are being properly outdeveloped now in this season. I still think Verstappen, for me, is going to win the championship. I just don't think Norris and McLaren are going to. There is still a long way to go in the season, and ultimately, a DNF can change things massively. But what was it, 84 points in today? Norris scored 18, Verstappen would have scored 10, so 8 points. So what is that like 76 points is the difference. It's a three race wins plus in Verstappen's favour still. So for Verstappen to be outscored by over 76 points in the last 11 races of the season, I don't really find that realistic, especially the fact that it's going to be, it's going to have to be on average 10 points a race, which, I mean, if Norris can get victories and Piastri can get the second places or vice versa, and I guess if Mercedes can keep their development up, it's not impossible. I just think it's a bit of a long shot. I think McLaren this season, I think every team just started too slow and Red Bull took advantage of that fully. I just think McLaren need to focus on the Constructors' Championship because that's only 50-odd points and that's really achievable. And I genuinely believe that McLaren will do that in the Constructors' Championship. Will beat Red Bull. That's my opinion on it though. But that's kind of what I thought of the race. I thought it was a very good race, very entertaining, lots of tyre chat, lots of drama, lots of radio chaos. The only thing we're going to look at now is the incident between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, and basically just give my thoughts and opinions on it. Okay, so very quickly then, turning our attention to the collision between Verstappen and also Hamilton at the end. Who was at fault? I think the best answer really is to just sort of go through it. So as they make their way down in towards, this bit blurry, my apologies, as they make their way down in towards the last corner, into turn one here, should I say. Firstly, Verstappen's got massive overspeed here, of course. He's got the DRS, Hamilton hasn't got the DRS. I thought he might have had it from the Williams, but he definitely didn't. As they go in towards turn one, you can see the overspeed that Verstappen's carrying here. Now, he might actually already be starting to brake later than Hamilton at this point, and I personally believe he might well be. I think Hamilton's probably put the brakes on at this point, but it'd be quite early to do that because normally they tend to brake sort of around here to do it. But as they get in towards the first corner, Verstappen's already committing himself to the inside line here. Hamilton's committing himself to the outside line, but crucially, Hamilton does a little bit of a trick that Verstappen does quite often. Look at where Hamilton is. If we fast forward it then to where we go to the inside line, Hamilton then moves over in the braking zone. Verstappen then obviously comes on through and he tries, but as he then tries to put any form of steering lock on, the front of the car locks up and they collide. So the difference is, who's at fault here for this? Realistically, not really anyone, to be honest. I mean, in my opinion, I actually agree with Hamilton and I agree with Horner. Both have said it's a racing incident, and I definitely agree with it. I think the thing is here is, number one, Verstappen, no matter what, has come into this corner way too hot. Like, it's too fast, it's never going to work, and as you see straight away, as soon as he applies the brakes, you can see it's difficult from this angle. The front right has already locked up. As soon as he then attempts to do any more of that, he's coming on through. Now, the difference here is what Hamilton is trying to do, is Hamilton is just trying to, at this point, make Verstappen have the tightest angle possible going in towards the corner. What he wants to do, basically, is give Verstappen a super tight apex, but to the point where Hamilton can then dictate from the corner, well, you're either going to have to force me wide if we stay in this position, or I'm basically going to try and keep your angle nice and tight, think that you're going to then come and try and force me wide, I'm going to duck in underneath you and do the up and over. That's basically what Hamilton's trying to do in this situation. Ultimately, Hamilton has moved under braking, and obviously in the Austrian Grand Prix, the FIA said that they should have, in hindsight, given Verstappen a black and white flag for moving under braking. Has Hamilton done it here? Yeah, he's moved under braking. There's no doubt about that. Is it as significant as the Lando Norris one? Kinda, yeah, because Verstappen's committing here, look, to go into the inside of the track, but using the middle of it. Hamilton's then forcing Max to go a little bit closer to the apex. But my ultimate thing here is, if you're not going to penalise somebody in a different race, you can't do it here. And if you don't want people moving under braking in the very final phases here, then ultimately put something in place going in the future to stop them from doing that. Otherwise, it'll continue. I think the rest of the replays are not really brilliant in terms of showcasing it. Again, you can see here, Hamilton, I thought, may have had DRS here on Albon. This gives me 2019 Hungary vibes, but in the reverse, because Verstappen had DRS on Ricciardo. Hamilton was then behind. They both overtook Ricciardo, but they both had DRS, and then Hamilton went to the outside, tried to overtake Verstappen, and had that run towards turn 4 that didn't work. But again, here you can see that Verstappen is committing basically to the inside line. You can see where he's braked, because obviously the DRS is closed. And then as Hamilton is coming on him, he has moved. There's no doubt about it. He's definitely moved into the braking point. But Verstappen here has come in too hot anyway under brakes. Like, Verstappen wants to force Lewis Hamilton wide. There's no doubt about that. And then obviously here Hamilton is trying to turn into the corner, and Verstappen goes in and he's gone too high, and Red Bull gives you wings. Now, the only thing that I can do to try and justify if Hamilton's moving under braking is if you look back to here, when Hamilton moves right here, at some point, Hamilton needs to turn into the corner. And what Hamilton's basically doing here is going, I'm not going to wait for you to get alongside me fully. I'm going to dictate when I want to turn for the corner now. So yes, he's moved by here, but eventually then, as he spots, all he's doing here is he's turning to go to the corner. He then spots Verstappen coming in at light years of speed, and then he stops. And obviously Verstappen's like, shit, I can't turn. The angle that I've now been given, like if I was here turning, we probably wouldn't have an issue. But if you want me to turn here, we got a problem. I ain't making the corner, so sorry about that. We're locking up and we're going through. But at this point here, when they make the collision, Hamilton is trying to get the apex in towards turn 1. And also, every single occasion that Verstappen has been about this far back from the Mercedes and even the Ferrari of Leclerc, he's not really gone for it. Like here, most times Verstappen, throughout the race, if you watch his fights with Hamilton, if you watch his fights with Leclerc, he hasn't gone for the overtake. He's just sat back. So I think what Verstappen's trying to do here is basically, right, he's busy watching Albon, and hopefully, because this back marker is my distraction, I can then just go for it, because ultimately here, Hamilton is gone, he's behind Albon. He's then going back onto the racing line. Hopefully, he's not looking in this mirror, and I can just send it up the inside whilst he's busy looking to get the apex line right and then go for it. I think ultimately, Albon is the cause of the crash. I'm joking. But Albon is definitely a factor in Verstappen's attempt to go for a lunge. Because ultimately, if Albon wasn't there, I think maybe Verstappen may have got... Verstappen probably would have done the overtake anyway, because ultimately Hamilton here would have had slip. He's obviously not got DRS, but he would have taken a slipstream off of Albon. So potentially Verstappen would have passed him anyway without the slipstream for Hamilton, and off obviously Max was close. But ultimately, also if Albon wasn't there, I think, look at Hamilton here. He's looking in the other mirror. He's trying to watch where Albon is, and then as they make their way down there, only now, in a very short second, is he going to start looking in the other mirror. The other angle is kind of just from this section. It's not really the greatest one here. Hamilton at this point, he's not turning. So while Hamilton has initially started his turn here to go into the corner, Verstappen has done a very wild lunge here. Hamilton then stops opening the steering. I think overall, like I say, it's definitely a racing incident. Red Bull gives you wings. I think it's definitely a racing incident. I think, look, Lewis is watching Albon. He's then turning into the corner. I don't think he's anticipating Max making a heavy lunge like this. Max has made the heavy lunge. Lewis has spotted that Max has made a heavy lunge. He's tried to basically stop himself so Verstappen doesn't come on through. But Max has come in too quickly that Lewis doesn't react in time to move his car out of the way. And obviously it sends Max high flying into the air. The only thing that I have, and the other thing in terms of contradictory, is that Verstappen in Austria literally said that this is not how you overtake in Formula 1. He's just dive bombing me everywhere. Well, Verstappen has just dive bombed Lewis Hamilton, and he sent it into the air. I'd be very surprised if they gave Verstappen a grid penalty going into the Hungarian Grand Prix. Ultimately, it's a move that didn't work. It hurt Verstappen. It didn't hurt Hamilton. May have flustered him a little bit, but it didn't hurt him. So, realistically, Max lost out to Leclerc, nearly lost out to Sainz. I'd leave it at that. And that is it for the F1 debate for the Hungarian Grand Prix. If you guys have enjoyed the video, like I said at the start, drop it a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. If you've got any other thoughts and opinions you want to give on the race, feel free to do so. And of course, next time we're going to be heading to Spa in a week's time for one of my favourite Grand Prix on the calendar, the Belgian Grand Prix. My predictions for the Belgian Grand Prix, I think Red Bull will fight back. I think this is a track that will definitely suit them a little bit more. I think it'll suit Mercedes a little bit more as well. It's a slightly less rear limited circuit, more so stress on the front tyres. So I think Mercedes will be back into their own a little bit. I actually think McLaren will slip back a tiny bit in Barcelona. Obviously, here in Hungary, they had significant drag compared to everybody else in terms of top speed. They're about 5 kph slower than the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull. And obviously we saw in Silverstone as well that while McLaren is competitive, and I think they'll be very competitive, especially in Sector 2, I just think they're a little bit behind the curve in terms of their dragginess, whereas I think Red Bull is more aerodynamically efficient. But we'll wait and see. Anything can happen, and of course teams can bring new parts as well to try and help that. But if you, like I said at the start of the video though, drop a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care all, peace.